Why do Koreans almost never get fat? You have probably stood in front of a mirror and wondered why your body keeps changing no matter what you do. You count calories, you cut carbs, you try every diet that trends for 3 weeks before you give up, and still the weight comes back. But here's something strange. In South Korea, that conversation almost never happens. Not because Koreans are obsessed with dieting, not because they have better willpower, and not because their bodies are fundamentally different from yours. The answer is something far more unexpected, and once you understand it, you will never look at your dinner plate the same way again after this. Let's start with a number that genuinely shocks most people when they first hear it. In the United States, roughly 42% of adults are classified as obese based on a body mass index of 30 or above. That's nearly half the country. Meanwhile, in South Korea, using that exact same international standard set by the World Health Organization, the number is approximately 4.7%. That's not a typo. The United States is running at almost 9 times the obesity rate of South Korea. Now, before you assume this is about genetics, pause for a moment, because researchers who have studied this gap for decades are increasingly pointing not at DNA, but at something far more ordinary. They're pointing at lunch. Specifically, they're pointing at what a typical Korean lunch actually looks like. Picture a small bowl of steamed white rice. Next to it, a bowl of clear broth soup. Then 3 or 4 small side dishes arranged in little ceramic plates. One might be kimchi, the fermented spicy cabbage that Korea is famous for. Another might be spinach seasoned with sesame oil and garlic, or thinly sliced cucumber tossed in vinegar. Maybe a small piece of grilled fish, a few cubes of soft tofu. That's a completely normal Korean meal. No one thinks of it as a diet. No one tracks the macros. It's just Tuesday lunch. But when researchers from the University of Washington and John Book National University analyzed this kind of eating pattern in a clinical study published in the Journal of Ethnic Foods in 2017, something remarkable showed up. A traditional Korean diet was not just associated with lower body weight, it was actively changing how your body processes food at a genetic level. The study found that Korean eating patterns regulated gene expression in ways that prevented obesity and improved insulin resistance in Caucasian adults, people who did not grow up eating Korean food, people whose genetics had nothing to do with Korea whatsoever. That's a stunning finding. The food itself was doing something. So what exactly is in that food? Here's the first piece of the puzzle: dietary fiber. The average American adult consumes somewhere between 17 and 19 grams of fiber per day. The average Korean adult consumes between 23 and 24 grams. That gap sounds small, but over a lifetime of eating, that difference compounds dramatically. Fiber is not just roughage that keeps your digestion moving. It physically slows down how fast your stomach empties. That means blood sugar rises more gradually after a meal. You feel full sooner. And crucially, you stay full longer. Your body has time to register that it has eaten before you've already reached for more food. Now look at what makes up that extra fiber in a Korean meal. Kimchi contributes about 12% of the average Korean adult's daily fiber intake on its own. Seaweed and other sea vegetables add another 4%. Leafy greens sautéed with garlic and sesame, called namul in Korean, contribute even more. The rice itself, even white rice, rounds out the total. This is not a radical superfood diet. This is a bowl of rice, some fermented cabbage, and a few vegetables, eaten 3 times a day for an entire lifetime. But fiber is only part of the story. The second piece of the puzzle is something alive inside that kimchi. When cabbage ferments in salt and chili paste, it produces billions of live microorganisms called lactobacillus bacteria. These are the same family of bacteria that scientists have spent decades studying for their effects on gut health. In Korea, the World Kimchi Institute, a government-funded research organization, has identified a specific strain called Lactobacillus plantarum Y-Kim 0175. Research published in 2025 by a team led by director Jang Hae-chun found that this strain actively suppresses inflammatory responses in the body. Why does inflammation matter for weight? Because chronic, low-level inflammation in the gut is one of the key mechanisms behind metabolic dysfunction. When your gut microbiome is imbalanced, your body becomes less efficient at processing fat. It stores more. It signals hunger more often. The entire metabolic system tilts towards weight gain. A healthy gut, packed with diverse bacteria from fermented foods, tilts it back the other way. And Koreans have been eating fermented food at every single meal for centuries without thinking of it as medicine. It was just kimchi. It was just a side dish. Now, here's where the story gets counterintuitive. You might assume that if Koreans eat rice at every meal, they must be consuming enormous amounts of carbohydrates, and you'd be right. But the way those carbohydrates arrive in the body is different from how refined carbohydrates work in a typical Western diet. A 12-month randomized controlled trial conducted by Professor Peter Clifton's team at the University of South Australia studied what happened when Australian adults adopted a traditional Korean diet. The results, published in Obesity Research and Clinical Practice in 2012, were clear. Participants lost weight. They maintained that weight loss over a full year, and critically, they did not feel deprived. They did not experience the intense hunger cycles that typically derail Western diets. The researchers concluded that the structure of a Korean meal, small portions of many different foods eaten together, naturally moderates calorie intake without requiring the person to consciously restrict themselves. This is not discipline. This is design. The third piece of the puzzle has nothing to do with food at all. It has to do with how Koreans move through their days. South Korea has one of the most densely woven public transportation systems in the world. In major cities like Seoul, getting almost anywhere requires walking. Walking to the station, walking between subway lines, walking to the exit, walking to your destination. A study tracking real-world daily step counts using wearable device data found that the average Korean takes 9,969 steps per day. That places Korea second in the world, behind only Hong Kong. The global average is roughly 8,000 steps. And unlike deliberate exercise, this walking is invisible. It doesn't feel like a workout. It's just the structure of daily life. But research consistently shows that people who commute by public transportation have a body mass index that is 0.7 to 1.1 points lower than people who commute by car. Day after day, year after year, that difference accumulates. Now here's the deeper cultural layer that ties all of this together. In Korea, one of the most common greetings you can say to someone is not hello, it's bap 먹었어요, did you eat? The anthropologist and food historian Ju Young-ha at the Academy of Korean Studies has traced this greeting back through centuries of Korean history. During periods of extreme poverty and famine, and Korea has survived many, asking whether someone had eaten was a literal check on their survival. Over generations, that question transformed into something else. It became a way of expressing care, of acknowledging that you see another person as someone worth looking after. The Korean word for family, shikku, literally means the mouths that eat together. The meal in Korea is never purely about nutrition. It's about connection. It's about obligation. It's about showing up for the people you love. And psychologically, eating in that context changes how you eat. You slow down. You pay attention. You're present with food instead of distracted by it. In a 2022 study published in Frontiers in Nutrition and tracked by the National Library of Medicine at the National Institutes of Medicine, researchers analyzing the Korean balanced diet found that it operated similarly to the Mediterranean diet in reducing the risk of metabolic syndrome. Beans, fish, seaweed, vegetables, and fermented foods formed the core. Processed foods were minimal. The combination produced measurably lower rates of abdominal obesity and cardiovascular risk. But there's a warning built into this story. The Korean body is not immune. It's not invincible. Researchers have found that Koreans are actually more metabolically vulnerable than their slim appearance suggests, because the pancreas of many Korean adults is structurally smaller than average. Insulin secretion is already working at a reduced capacity. This means that when Korean eating patterns shift towards Western food, weight-related complications arrive faster and more severely than they would in a person with different physiology. And that shift is happening. Obesity rates among Korean men in their 30s and 40s are rising sharply. Fast food is everywhere. Delivery apps have made ultra-processed meals the easiest choice at 11 at night. The numbers are starting to climb in a direction that worries Korean health authorities. The ancient design is under pressure from the modern world.
Which brings us back to you, standing in front of that mirror. The reason Koreans almost never get fat is not a secret. It's not a single superfood or a magic supplement. It's a pattern. Small portions, many different vegetables, fermented food at every meal.
Fiber from sources that are alive and varied, a city built for walking, and a culture that treats eating as a form of love. None of that is impossible to adopt. None of it requires you to be Korean. The University of Washington study proved that. Australian adults in Peter Clifton's trial proved that. The food works regardless of where you're born. The harder question is not what the food does. The harder question is this: when did you last sit down, without your phone, without the television, and asked someone at your table whether they had eaten today? Because that question, the one Koreans have been asking for centuries, might be the real reason the weight never came.